At the hospital, the CEO's only son was dying. Until the black maid cried out, "The IV is poisoned! The IV is poisoned!" The scream from the hospital cleaning lady shattered the sterile silence of room 312 at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles, and billionaire CEO Richard Blackstone looked up from his dying son's bedside to see a black woman in a janitor's uniform about to save the only thing in his world that mattered. Before we get deep into the story, please let me know in the comment where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy the story, because tomorrow I have another beautiful story to share with you and I don't want you to miss it for anything. The fluorescent lights of Mount Sinai Hospital hummed their familiar tune as Rosa Martinez pushed her cleaning cart down the marble-floored corridor of the VIP wing. At 53, she had perfected the art of invisibility. Eyes down, movements efficient, presence forgotten the moment she left a room. The night shift suited her. Fewer people meant fewer chances to be reminded that in their world of designer gowns and charitable galas, she was nothing more than background noise. Her weathered hands gripped the cart handle tighter as she approached room 847, the penthouse suite that had been buzzing with activity for the past 3 days. Through the partially open door, she could see the fortress of medical equipment surrounding a small bed, where 12-year-old Thomas Sterling lay unconscious, his young face pale against the Egyptian cotton pillows his father had specially ordered from their estate in the Hamptons. Rosa paused, her heart clenching. The boy reminded her so much of her own Miguel. The same white hair, the same peaceful expression that children wore in sleep. But Miguel would never wake up again. The drunk driver who'd taken her son's life 3 years ago in Queens had walked free, his expensive lawyers ensuring that justice remained a luxury she couldn't afford. She shook her head, pushing the painful memories aside. Work was her escape, her survival. She entered the room quietly, beginning her routine of emptying trash bins and wiping surfaces that were already spotless. The Sterling family's money ensured that every corner of this room gleamed, but Rosa's pride demanded perfection regardless. 23 floors below, in his corner office overlooking Central Park, William Sterling stared out at the city that had built his empire. At 45, he commanded respect in every boardroom from Wall Street to Silicon Valley. His pharmaceutical company, Sterling Biotech, had revolutionized cancer treatment, making him not just wealthy but powerful. Politicians sought his endorsement, charities courted his donations, and society pages chronicled his every move. But tonight, none of that mattered. His only son, his heir, lay dying, and all his money couldn't buy the one thing he needed most: answers. "The tests came back negative again, Mr. Sterling," Dr. Harrison had said earlier that evening, his voice carefully modulated in the way expensive doctors spoke to powerful patients. "We're exploring every avenue, but Thomas's condition continues to deteriorate despite our best efforts." William's jaw tightened as he remembered those words. In business, problems had solutions. Obstacles could be bought, negotiated away, or simply overpowered with enough resources. But his son's mysterious illness had proven immune to his usual methods. His phone buzzed with messages from board members, stock analysts, and reporters, all wanting updates. The business world watched nervously as Sterling Biotech's stock price fluctuated with each leaked report about Thomas's condition. Even his son's suffering had become a commodity to be traded and speculated upon. He thought about calling his ex-wife, Catherine, who was somewhere in the Swiss Alps with her new husband, blissfully unaware that their son was fighting for his life. Their marriage had ended 5 years ago when William chose a merger over their family vacation, and Catherine had finally realized she'd married a company, not a man. She'd taken nothing in the divorce except her freedom, leaving Thomas to be raised by a rotation of nannies and boarding school administrators. Back in room 847, Rosa finished cleaning and was about to leave when something caught her eye. The IV bag hanging beside Thomas's bed looked wrong. Not the clear fluid she'd seen earlier, but something with a barely perceptible tinge. She'd seen enough hospital equipment during Miguel's final days to know that 4 fluids should be crystal clear. Her heart began to race, but she forced herself to stay calm. Who was she to question the medical staff of Mount Sinai? She was just a maid, a woman who'd dropped out of high school to work, whose English still carried the accent of her childhood in Puerto Rico. These doctors had trained at Harvard and Johns Hopkins. They knew things she couldn't even pronounce. But as she watched Thomas's small chest rise and fall with mechanical precision, she couldn't shake the memory of Miguel's final night, when she'd noticed something similar and been too afraid to speak up. The doctor had dismissed her concerns, and by morning her son was gone. What if your silence costs another mother her child? She asked herself, the question echoing in the sterile silence of the room. Rosa looked at the boy's peaceful face, then at the IV line that seemed to pulse with an almost malevolent presence. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone, then stopped. Who would believe her? Who would even listen? The sound of expensive shoes clicking against marble interrupted her thoughts. Through the glass partition, she could see William Sterling approaching. His tailored suit wrinkled from 3 days of hospital vigils, his usually perfect hair disheveled with worry. Even in his exhaustion, he carried himself with the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. Rosa quickly gathered her supplies, preparing to become invisible once again. But as William entered the room and she saw the raw pain in his eyes, the same pain she'd carried for 3 years, something inside her shifted. Question for reflection. Have you ever noticed something important that others missed, but felt too powerless to speak up? Share your thoughts below about when ordinary people become heroes. Maybe tonight, being invisible wasn't an option. William Sterling barely noticed the cleaning woman as he entered his son's room. His entire world had narrowed to the rhythmic beeping of machines and the shallow rise and fall of Thomas's chest. He pulled the leather chair closer to the bed, a chair that cost more than most people's monthly salary, and reached for his son's hand. "I'm here, buddy," he whispered, his voice cracking in a way that would have shocked his board of directors. "Daddy's here." The irony wasn't lost on him. For 12 years, he'd been too busy building an empire to truly be present. Now, when presence was all he could offer, it might be too late. Thomas's skin felt cold despite the heated blankets, and his breathing had grown more labored throughout the night. Rosa hesitated at the doorway, her cleaning cart forgotten. She watched this powerful man, a man whose face graced magazine covers and whose decisions affected thousands of jobs, reduced to a frightened father whispering to his unconscious child. In this moment, stripped of his armor of wealth and status, he looked as vulnerable as any parent she'd comforted in the children's ward. But it was the 4 bag that held her attention. In the soft lighting of the room, she could now clearly see what she'd only suspected before, a slight discoloration like oil mixed with water. Her pulse quickened as memories of Miguel's last night crashed over her. The same subtle wrongness she'd noticed but dismissed, the same hesitation to challenge authority, the same fear of speaking up. "Senor Sterling," she said softly, her accented English barely above a whisper. William didn't look up, lost in his own world of grief and guilt. He was remembering Thomas's last conscious words 3 days ago. "Will you stay with me this time, Dad?" The question had cut deeper than any business rival's attack, deeper than any stock market crash. His son had been asking for something William had never learned to give, his undivided presence. "Senor Sterling," Rosa tried again, her voice stronger now. This time he looked up, his red-rimmed eyes focusing on her with surprise. In his world, Service staff were invisible until summoned, and being interrupted during a private moment was unthinkable. "What is it?" he asked, his tone carrying the automatic authority of someone unaccustomed to being approached unbidden. Rosa's mouth went dry. She could see the expensive suit, the watch that cost more than she made in 2 years, the way he sat with the unconscious privilege of someone who'd never been dismissed or ignored. Everything about him screamed power and control. Everything except his eyes, which held the desperate fear of a man watching his world collapse. "The 4, she managed, pointing with a trembling finger. "Something is wrong with the 4. William followed her gaze to the bag of fluid hanging beside Thomas's bed. To him, it looked like every other medical apparatus in the room. Foreign, intimidating, but presumably life-saving. "What do you mean?" Rosa stepped closer, her heart hammering against her ribs. She thought of Miguel, of the silent scream that had lived in her throat for 3 years, of all the time she'd been made to feel small and insignificant. But looking at Thomas's pale face, she found a courage she didn't know she possessed. "I cleaned hospitals for 15 years, she said, her accent thickening with emotion. "I see many 4 bags. This one." She paused, searching for the English words that might save a life. "This one has color. Small but there. For fluid should be clear like water." William's expression shifted from irritation to confusion. "That's impossible. This is Mount Sinai. The doctors here are the best in the world. They've been monitoring everything." But even as he spoke the words, doubt began to creep in. Thomas's condition had been deteriorating despite the best care money could buy. The symptoms didn't match any known illness, and the treatments weren't working. What if? "I could be wrong," Rosa said quickly, seeing the skepticism in his eyes. "I clean floors, empty trash. But my son." Her voice broke, and she had to swallow hard before continuing. "My son Miguel, he died 3 years ago. The night before, I see something like this. I say nothing because I am nobody, just a maid. And in the morning—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. The raw pain in her voice told the story more powerfully than words ever could. William stood slowly, his business instincts warring with a father's desperate hope. In boardrooms, he made million-dollar decisions based on incomplete information, trusting his gut when data wasn't enough. But this was his son's life, and the woman suggesting something was wrong was someone society had taught him not to see, let alone trust. He looked at Rosa, really looked at her for the first time. She was small in stature, but there was something fierce in her dark eyes, something that reminded him of his own mother, who'd worked 3 jobs to put him through college before he'd become too important to remember her sacrifices. "Show me," he said quietly. Rosa moved to the 4 stand, her hands shaking as she pointed to the nearly invisible discoloration. "See here, how is it not completely clear? And the smell." She leaned closer to the tubing. "It is very faint, but there is something." William bent down, his expensive cologne mixing with the sterile hospital air. At first, he smelled nothing unusual. Then, just as Rosa had said, there was the faintest chemical odor, something that didn't belong in a medical setting. "Jesus Christ," he breathed, the profanity escaping before he could stop it. At that moment, the careful hierarchy of their world collapsed. The CEO and the maid stood side by side, united by a terrible understanding. Someone was trying to kill his son. "We have to stop it," William said, reaching for the 4 line. "No." Rosa grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. "If you just disconnect, it could hurt him worse. We need a nurse, we need a doctor." But we need one we trust. Their eyes met, his wide with shock and growing rage, hers bright with tears and determination. In the space between heartbeats, something passed between them, a recognition that in this sterile room, surrounded by machines and monitors, they were the only ones who could save Thomas. "The 4 is poisoned," Rosa suddenly cried out, her voice carrying down the hallway with a force that surprised them both. The words hung in the air like a gunshot, shattering the hushed reverence of the VIP wing. Within seconds, footsteps pounded down the corridor as nurses and security guards responded to the alarm in her voice. William stared at Rosa, seeing her as if for the first time, not as invisible help, but as the woman who might have just saved his son's life. And Rosa, who had spent 3 years drowning in the silence of her own ignored warnings, finally felt the weight of unspoken words lift from her chest. "Thank you," William whispered, just as the room exploded with activity. But Rosa barely heard him. She was watching Thomas's face, praying to the Virgin Mary that this time, speaking up wouldn't be too late. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Dr. Harrison burst through the door first, his usually composed demeanor cracking as he took in the scene. William Sterling standing protectively over his son while a hospital maid pointed accusingly at the 4 equipment. "Mr. Sterling, what's happening here?" Dr. Harrison's voice carried the carefully modulated tone of someone trying to maintain control of a situation that was rapidly spiraling. "She says the 4 is contaminated," William said, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "Poisoned." Dr. Harrison's eyes flicked to Rosa, and she saw something there, a flash of recognition quickly replaced by professional dismissal. "Mr. Sterling, I understand you're under tremendous stress, but I assure you that every aspect of Thomas's care has been meticulously—" "Look at the bag," William interrupted, his CEO instincts taking over. In boardrooms, he'd learned to read people's faces, to spot the micro-expressions that revealed deception. And right now, Dr. Harrison looked like a man caught in a lie. 2 nurses had entered the room, followed by a security guard whose hand rested meaningfully on his radio. Rosa felt their eyes on her, the interloper, the troublemaker, the maid who dared to question her betters. She'd seen this look before, in doctors' offices when she'd asked too many questions about Miguel's treatment, in school meetings when she challenged her son's teachers, in government offices when she tried to get justice for his death. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step away from the patient," the security guard said, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to removing unwanted people from places they didn't belong. "No," William said sharply. "She stays." The word hung in the air like a challenge. Dr. Harrison's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Mr. Sterling, I understand your concern, but we have protocols. This woman is not family, she's not medical staff." "She's the one who noticed something was wrong," William shot back. "Which is more than I can say for the medical staff who've been watching my son deteriorate for 3 days." Rosa watched the power dynamics play out before her, feeling like she was caught in a storm of forces beyond her control. She'd spoken up, done what her heart had demanded, but now the weight of challenging the established order was crushing down on her. These were important people with important jobs, and she was just a maid who cleaned their floors. "Senor Sterling," she said quietly, tugging at his sleeve. "Maybe I should go. Maybe I was wrong." "No." His voice was steel. "You weren't wrong. I can smell it too now." He turned to Dr. Harrison. "Test the 4 fluid. Right now." Dr. Harrison's composure finally cracked. "Mr. Sterling, you're asking me to halt treatment based on the observations of a cleaning woman who has no medical training whatsoever. The liability alone. The liability of letting my son die is something you'll never recover from," William said, his voice dropping to the dangerous quiet that had made opponents tremble in business negotiations. Test the fluid now. One of the nurses, a young woman with kind eyes, stepped forward. "I'll take a sample to the lab," she said quietly. "No," Dr. Harrison snapped. "Nurse Williams, you will not disrupt this patient's treatment based on hysteria and paranoia." The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of Thomas's monitors. Rosa felt the familiar weight of being dismissed, of being told she was wrong simply because of who she was. She thought of Miguel's funeral, where she'd stood alone because no one believed her son deserved justice. She thought of the years of silence, of swallowing her words, of making herself smaller and smaller until she'd almost disappeared entirely. But then she looked at Thomas's pale face, at the slight discoloration in the forebag that everyone else was determined to ignore, and something inside her hardened into resolve. "I may just be a cleaning woman," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "But I have eyes. I have a nose. And I have the heart of a mother who watches her son die because nobody listens to her." She turned to Dr. Harrison, meeting his gaze directly. "You want to ignore me? Fine. But this boy will die, and you will know it was because you think I am too stupid to see what is right in front of your face." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. William watched Rosa transform before his eyes, saw her shed the invisible cloak of servitude and stand tall despite being barely 5 feet tall. In boardrooms around the world, he'd witnessed men and women find their power, but he'd never seen anything as remarkable as this small woman refusing to be silenced. Dr. Harrison's face flushed red. "Security. I want this woman removed immediately. She's disrupting patient care and making unfounded accusations." "Touch her and I'll have your jobs," William said quietly. The security guard's hand dropped from his radio. "Mr. Sterling," Dr. Harrison tried again, his voice taking on a pleading quality. "You're not thinking clearly. The stress of Thomas's condition has—" "What?" "Made me paranoid." William moved closer to the doctor, using his height advantage to intimidate. "Has it made me willing to listen to someone who actually noticed something wrong while the rest of you stood around with your degrees and your protocols and watched my son dying?" Rosa felt a strange sense of déjà vu. This was what she'd dreamed of 3 years ago. Someone with power standing up for her, believing her, fighting for what was right. But it was too late for Miguel. It might not be too late for Thomas. "I'll test the fluid myself," she said suddenly. All eyes turned to her. "I have worked in hospitals for 15 years. I know where the lab is. I know the technicians. They will test it for me." "You can't just walk into a hospital lab," Dr. Harrison began. "Watch me," Rosa said simply. She moved toward the fore stand, but Dr. Harrison stepped between her and the equipment. "I cannot allow this. Mr. Sterling, you're putting your son at risk by listening to this woman's delusions." William studied the doctor's face, noting the sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool hospital air, the way his hands trembled almost imperceptibly, the desperation creeping into his voice. In business, William had learned to recognize when someone was hiding something. Dr. Harrison was hiding something big. "Why are you so afraid of testing the 4 fluid?" William asked quietly. "I'm not afraid," Dr. Harrison said too quickly. "I'm protecting my patient from unnecessary procedures that could compromise his care." "Bullshit," William said flatly. "A simple lab test doesn't compromise anything except your story." The standoff stretched between them, tension crackling like electricity. Thomas lay unconscious in the center of it all, his young life hanging in the balance while the adults around him fought over truth and power and pride. Rosa looked at the boy, then at his father, then at the doctor who seemed so determined to prevent any investigation. She thought of Miguel, of justice denied, of silence enforced by people who believed their authority mattered more than a child's life. She'd been invisible for so long that everyone had forgotten she had hands as well as eyes. Moving quickly before anyone could stop her, Rosa reached past Dr. Harrison and disconnected the 4-line from Thomas's port, capping it to prevent infection. The fluid stopped flowing into the boy's veins immediately. "What have you done?" Dr. Harrison shouted, lunging toward her. William caught the doctor's arm, his grip iron strong. "She potentially saved my son's life. The question is, why are you so upset that she did?" In the sudden silence that followed, they could all hear it. Thomas's breathing, which had been growing more labored throughout the night, began to ease ever so slightly. Rosa held the 4-line in her hands like evidence in a trial, the faintly discolored fluid still visible in the tubing. "Now we test," she said simply. The next hour became a blur of accusations, denials, and desperate maneuvering. Hospital security had escorted both William and Rosa to a sterile conference room on the administrative floor while Thomas remained under the watchful eye of Nurse Williams, the only medical staff member William trusted at that moment. Rosa sat in a chair designed for executives, its expensive leather a stark contrast to her worn hospital uniform. Across from her, William paced like a caged animal, his phone pressed to his ear as he barked orders to lawyers, private investigators, and board members he'd awakened in the middle of the night. "I want a full background check on Dr. Harrison within the hour," he was saying. "And get our pharmaceutical safety team here immediately. If someone is tampering with 4 fluids, I want to know who, how, and why." Dr. Margaret Chen, the hospital's chief of staff, sat at the head of the conference table, her expression carefully neutral as she tried to manage the crisis that was rapidly spiraling beyond her control. The last thing Mount Sinai needed was a scandal involving their largest donor's family. "Mr. Sterling," Dr. Chen said carefully, "I understand your concerns, but we need to approach this systematically. Dr. Harrison has been with us for 12 years. His record is impeccable." "His record doesn't matter if he's trying to kill my son," William shot back, ending his phone call and turning to face the room. Rosa had remained silent throughout the proceedings, overwhelmed by the boardroom environment and the rapid-fire conversations happening around her. She felt like an imposter in this world of power suits and advanced degrees, but every time she considered slipping away, she remembered Thomas's pale face and Miguel's last night. "Mrs. Martinez," Dr. Chen said, turning to Rosa with the kind of smile reserved for difficult situations. "I want to thank you for your vigilance. However, making accusations against our medical staff is a serious matter. Dr. Harrison is threatening legal action for defamation." Rosa's hands clenched in her lap. "I don't defame anybody. I just say what I see." "What you think you saw," Dr. Chen corrected gently. "Without proper training, it's easy to misinterpret medical equipment." William stopped pacing. She was right about the smell. "I confirmed it myself. Stress can cause olfactory hallucinations," Dr. Chen said smoothly. "The mind can create sensory experiences when under extreme duress." "Are you calling us both crazy?" William's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Before Dr. Chen could respond, the conference room door opened. Nurse Williams entered, her face flushed with urgency. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said breathlessly, "but you need to know. Thomas's vital signs have improved significantly since the 4 was disconnected. His breathing is stronger, his color is better, and his neurological responses are showing marked improvement." The room fell silent. Dr. Chen's carefully composed expression cracked slightly. "That could be coincidental," she said weakly. "Coincidental my ass," William growled. "Where's the lab report on the 4 fluid?" Nurse Williams glanced nervously at Dr. Chen. That's the other thing. Dr. Harrison ordered the 4 bag and tubing to be disposed of as contaminated medical waste. The samples were destroyed before they could be tested. Rosa felt the familiar punch of injustice in her stomach. "Of course they were," she said bitterly. "Just like Miguel's medical records got lost. Just like the police report disappeared. Evidence has a way of vanishing when it might help people like me." William's face went white with rage. He destroyed evidence. "He followed standard protocol for contaminated materials," Dr. Chen said quickly. But her voice lacked conviction. "Bullshit protocol," Rosa said, her voice rising with anger. "I work here. I know the protocol. For bags don't get destroyed without testing when the patient gets better after removing them." William stared at Rosa, seeing her anger and recognizing the pain beneath it. "This happened to you before. With your son." Rosa nodded, tears threatening to spill over. "Miguel was in the emergency room. Car accident. I tell doctors something is wrong with his blood pressure medicine, but they say I worry too much, I don't understand medical things. He died that night. Later I find out the medicine was recalled for contamination, but nobody tell us. Nobody test. Nobody listens to the worried mother." The silence in the room was deafening. William felt something crack open in his chest, a recognition of how the world worked for people without power, without money, without voices that demanded to be heard. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, and Rosa could hear that he meant it. Dr. Chen cleared her throat. "This is all very tragic, but we need to focus on Thomas's care going forward. I suggest we continue with standard treatment protocols while conducting a thorough review." "No," William said flatly. "No more standard protocols. No more trusting the system that just tried to kill my son." He turned to Rosa. "You saved Thomas's life. I want you involved in every decision about his care from now on." "Mr. Sterling, that's highly irregular," Dr. Chen protested. "Mrs. Martinez has no medical training." "Neither do I, but I know what I saw and what I smelled," William shot back. "And unlike your medical staff, she was paying attention." Rosa looked up at him in shock. "You want me to help with your son?" "I want you to do what you've been doing. Watch over him like he's your own child. Because right now, you're the only person in this hospital I trust." Dr. Chen's professional mask finally slipped. "This is unacceptable. I cannot allow a custodial staff member to interfere with patient care." William smiled coldly. "Then we'll transfer Thomas to another hospital. Tonight. And tomorrow morning, every news outlet in the city will know that Mount Sinai destroyed evidence and refused to investigate a potential poisoning attempt on a child." The threat hung in the air like a sword. Mount Sinai depended on its reputation, and William Sterling had the power to destroy it with a single press conference. "What do you want?" Dr. Chen asked quietly. "I want Rosa with Thomas at all times. I want new medical staff. People she and I both approve. I want every piece of equipment tested before it goes near my son. And I want to know who was trying to kill him and why." Rosa felt overwhelmed by the sudden reversal of her fortune. 12 hours ago, she'd been invisible. Now a billionaire was asking her to help save his son's life. I don't know if I can, she whispered. I'm just. You're the woman who refused to stay silent when it mattered, William said firmly. You're the woman who saw what trained doctors missed. You're the woman who had the courage to speak up when everyone else was ready to watch a child die. He paused, his voice softening. You're exactly what Thomas needs. Looking at him, Rosa saw not the powerful CEO from the magazines, but a frightened father who'd just realized how close he'd come to losing everything that truly mattered. And for the first time in 3 years, she felt like her voice, her experience, her instincts, her stubborn refusal to be silenced, might actually save a life instead of arriving too late to matter. Okay, she said quietly. I will help you save your son. Outside the conference room windows, the lights of Manhattan twinkled like stars, but neither of them was looking at the view. They were both thinking about a small boy in a hospital bed who'd brought them together across a divide that should have been impossible to cross. In the space of 2 hours, the invisible maid and the untouchable CEO had become unlikely allies in a battle that was just beginning. The new medical team had been assembled within hours. Doctors from competing hospitals who owed William favors, nurses whose discretion was guaranteed by generous compensation packages, and a security detail that ensured no one entered Thomas's room without explicit permission. But it was Rosa who sat closest to the boy's bedside, her weathered hands gentle as she adjusted his blankets. Thomas had been awake for 20 minutes now, his eyes clear for the first time in days. The improvement was remarkable. Color had returned to his cheeks, and he was able to speak in whispers. But more importantly, he was asking for his father. Dad. Thomas's voice was raspy but stronger. What happened? I feel different. Better. William gripped his son's hand, trying to keep his voice steady. You were very sick, buddy. But you're going to be okay now. Thomas's gaze shifted to Rosa, who was organizing medical supplies with the focused efficiency of someone who'd learned hospital routines through heartbreak. Who's that lady? That's Rosa, William said, his voice warming. She's the one who figured out what was wrong. She saved your life. Rosa looked up, meeting the boy's curious eyes. In them, she saw Miguel at the same age. Bright, trusting, full of questions about the world. Her throat tightened with familiar grief, but this time it was tempered by something else. Hope. Hola, amigo, she said softly, using the endearment that had died with her own son. How are you feeling? Better, Thomas said with a small smile. Dad never told me he had any friends who worked at the hospital. The innocent observation hit both adults like a physical blow. William realized that his son was right. In 12 years, he'd never introduced Thomas to anyone who wasn't wealthy, powerful, or useful to his business empire. And Rosa was struck by the casual assumption that she and William could be friends, a possibility that had never occurred to her before that night. We just met, William said quietly. But sometimes the most important people come into your life when you need them most. Dr. Sarah Kim, the new attending physician, approached with test results. The blood work confirms it, she said grimly. Thomas had significant levels of oleander extract in his system, a highly toxic plant compound that's nearly impossible to detect without specifically looking for it. Another few hours and the damage would have been irreversible. William's jaw clenched. Oleander. That's not something that would accidentally end up in an 4 bag. No, Dr. Kim agreed. This was deliberate. Someone wanted Thomas dead, and they were very careful about how they went about it. Rosa felt a chill run down her spine. Oleander, she repeated softly. My grandmother in Puerto Rico, she warned us children never to touch the pink flowers. She says they are beautiful but deadly. You recognize it? William asked. Rosa nodded slowly. The smell. Now I know what it was. Like almonds, but wrong. Sweet, but bitter. She looked at Thomas, who had fallen back asleep, exhausted by the brief conversation. Someone who knows plants very well did this. William was quiet for a long moment, his business mind working through possibilities. I need to make some calls. There are only a handful of people who would benefit from Thomas's death, and fewer still who would know about oleander poisoning. Mr. Sterling, Dr. Kim interrupted gently. I think you should know the police are here. They want to interview both of you about what happened. Rosa's face went pale. In her experience, police interviews rarely went well for people like her. Maybe I should go home, she said, starting to gather her things. No, William said firmly. We're in this together now. And you're the key witness. Without your testimony, whoever did this walks free. But Rosa was already shaking her head, memories of Miguel's death crashing over her. Police don't listen to people like me. They listen to doctors, to important people. I tell them what I see, and they write down something different. The case gets closed, nobody gets arrested, and the person who hurt Miguel, he is still driving around Queens, probably hurting other people's children. William stopped moving, struck by the pain in her voice. Tell me what really happened to your son. Rosa was quiet for so long that he thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Miguel was crossing the street to buy me flowers for Mother's Day. He saved his allowance for 2 months. She smiled sadly at the memory. This drunk man in an expensive car hit him. Miguel was in hospital for 3 days. I stay with him, sleep in a chair and watch everything. The 3rd night, I see a nurse give him medicine that looks different, smells different. I ask questions, but they say I worry too much, that I don't understand medical procedures. She paused, wiping at her eyes. Miguel died that morning. Later, the lawyer told me the medicine was recalled for contamination, but somehow the hospital still has old bottles. Miguel wasn't supposed to get it. But mistakes got covered up, records got lost, and the drunk driver's lawyer made it look like Miguel died from accident injuries, not from bad medicine. Jesus, William breathed. The system failed you completely. The system works exactly like it is supposed to, Rosa said bitterly. Rich drunk men get good lawyers, pay fines, and keep driving. Hospitals cover up mistakes, no lawsuit, no bad publicity. And Miguel's mother? She is just a crazy grief-stricken woman who doesn't understand how things work. William felt something shift inside him, a recognition of privilege he'd never had to examine before. That's not going to happen this time, he said quietly. This time people will listen. Rosa looked at him skeptically. Because now it happens to rich white boys instead of poor Puerto Rican boys? The question hung between them, stark and uncomfortable. William wanted to deny it, to say that wasn't how the world worked. But he was too smart and too honest to pretend otherwise. Yes, he said simply. Because this time, the victim has a father with enough power to demand justice. And that father isn't going to let the woman who saved his son be silenced or ignored. Rosa studied his face, looking for the lie or the patronizing tone she'd encountered so many times before. Instead, she saw something she hadn't expected. Genuine respect and a growing understanding of how different their worlds had always been. You really believe that? She asked. I know it, William said firmly. Because this time, I'm the one with the power, and I choose to use it for justice instead of profit. Before Rosa could respond, two detectives entered the room. Detective James Rodriguez was a tired-looking man in his 40s who carried himself with the weary authority of someone who'd seen too much. Detective Lisa Park was younger, sharper, and clearly the lead investigator. "Mr. Sterling," Detective Park said, showing her badge. "We need to ask you and Mrs. Martinez some questions about what happened here tonight." William stood, automatically positioning himself between the detectives and Rosa, a protective gesture that didn't go unnoticed. "Mrs. Martinez is the one who discovered the poisoning," he said. "Without her, my son would be dead. I want her treated as the hero she is, not as a suspect." Detective Rodriguez glanced at Rosa with interest. "Mrs. Martinez, we understand you were working as a custodial staff member when you noticed something wrong with the floor equipment?" Rosa nodded, her voice barely audible. "See. Yes. Can you tell us exactly what you observed?" Rosa looked at William, who nodded encouragingly. Slowly, carefully, she began to tell her story. But this time, instead of being dismissed or ignored, the detectives listened intently, taking detailed notes and asking clarifying questions that showed they took her observations seriously. And for the first time in 3 years, Rosa began to believe that maybe, just maybe, justice wasn't always reserved for people who could afford to buy it. But as she spoke, she couldn't shake the feeling that the real danger was just beginning. Someone had tried to murder a child in one of New York's most prestigious hospitals, and that someone was still out there, watching and waiting. The hospital cafeteria was nearly empty at dawn, save for a few exhausted residents grabbing coffee before rounds. William and Rosa sat across from each other at a corner table, both physically and emotionally drained from the night's events. Thomas was stable and sleeping peacefully under heavy security, giving them their first moment alone together. William pushed a plate of untouched scrambled eggs around his plate while Rosa cradled a cup of café con leche, the one comfort food the hospital kitchen could approximate from her childhood. "I keep thinking about what you said," William said quietly, "about the system working exactly like it's supposed to. You're right. I've spent my entire life benefiting from that system without ever questioning who it was failing." Rosa looked up from her coffee, surprised by his honesty. "You don't have to feel guilty for being rich, Senor Sterling. Being rich is not a crime." "Call me William," he said. "And it's not guilt exactly. It's awareness. I built my fortune by making medications more affordable, telling myself I was helping people. But I never stopped to ask who couldn't afford them even at reduced prices. I never wondered about the mothers sitting in emergency rooms, watching their children suffer because they couldn't pay for treatment." Rosa studied his face, seeing exhaustion and something else, a vulnerability she hadn't expected from someone so powerful. "What made you start your company?" William was quiet for a moment, then pulled out his phone and showed her a photo. A young man in military dress uniform, smiling broadly at the camera. "My brother Marcus," he said. "He was 4 years older than me, my hero growing up. He enlisted in the army right after high school, and served 3 tours in Afghanistan. When he came back, he had PTSD and chronic pain from an IED explosion. The medications he needed cost more than his disability payments covered." Rosa's expression softened. "What happened to him?" "He killed himself on a Tuesday morning in 2010, William said simply. "Left a note saying he couldn't afford to live and couldn't afford to die. That's when I decided to go into pharmaceuticals, to make sure no other family lost someone because they couldn't pay for medicine." "I'm sorry," Rosa said, and he could hear that she truly meant it. "Losing someone you love, it changes everything about how you see the world." Tell me about Miguel, William said gently. Rosa's hands tightened around her coffee cup. He was my miracle baby. I have him when I'm 38, after doctors say I probably will never have children. His father leaves when Miguel is 2, say he does not want to be tied down to cleaning woman and her kid. She smiled sadly. But Miguel, he never makes me feel like a burden. From when he was tiny, he said, "Mommy, one day I will take care of you. One day we live somewhere nice and you no have to clean other people's messes." He sounds like a wonderful boy. He was everything good in the world, Rosa said, tears threatening to spill. He get good grades, helps neighbors with groceries, and saves money to buy me presents. The day he died, he was going to a florist to buy me roses for Mother's Day. Pink ones, because those are my favorites. William reached across the table and covered her hand with his. The gesture surprised them both, a natural comfort that crossed all the boundaries society had built between them. "I'm going to find out who tried to hurt Thomas," he said. "And I'm going to make sure they pay for what they did. But more than that, I'm going to find out what really happened to Miguel. If there was a cover-up, if someone escaped justice, we're going to fix it." Rosa looked at their joined hands, his soft and manicured, hers rough from years of cleaning chemicals and hard work, and felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope mixed with the possibility of justice. "Why do you care about Miguel?" she asked. "He was nobody to you." "He was somebody to you," William said simply. "And you saved my son. More than that. And you saved my son. More than that," William continued. "You're showing me what real courage looks like. I've spent my whole life thinking that power meant controlling boardrooms and stock prices. But you stood up to doctors, administrators, security, people who could have you fired or arrested, because you knew a child's life was at stake. That's the kind of strength I want Thomas to learn." Rosa felt tears spilling over now, not from sadness but from the overwhelming feeling of being truly seen for the first time in years. "I was so scared," she admitted. "When I saw that 4 bag, all I could think about was Miguel's last night. How I stayed quiet because I thought I was too stupid to question doctors. How my silence cost me my son." "But you didn't stay quiet this time," William pointed out. "Even when it would have been easier to walk away, to let someone else handle it, you spoke up. You fought for Thomas the way you wish you could have fought for Miguel." "See," Rosa whispered. Maybe Miguel would be proud of his mommy for finally finding her voice." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the morning sun paint the hospital cafeteria in golden light. Around them, the day shift was beginning to arrive. Nurses grabbing coffee, residents reviewing charts, families keeping vigil over loved ones. It was the routine continuation of life and healing that hospitals represented. But it felt different now to both of them. "Can I tell you something that might sound crazy?" William asked. Rosa nodded. "Last night, when Thomas was unconscious and I thought I might lose him, I kept thinking about all the things I never taught him. How to change a tire, how to cook something more complicated than cereal, how to stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves." He paused. "But you already know all of those things, don't you?" Rosa smiled through her tears. "Miguel could change tires before he could drive a car. I make sure he knows how to take care of himself, how to be a good man." "I want Thomas to learn those things too," William said. "I want him to understand that being wealthy isn't the same as being valuable, that the most important people in your life might be the ones society tells you to ignore." "He's a good boy already," Rosa said. "I see it in his eyes. He has a kind heart." Like his mother, William said quietly. Rosa looked confused. I thought his mother was in Switzerland? William's expression darkened slightly. Catherine is his biological mother, yes. But she chose her new husband's lifestyle over raising her son. She hasn't seen Thomas in 8 months, and hasn't even called since Christmas. He looked directly at Rosa. But you sat with him all night like he was your own child. You fought for him when his own doctors wouldn't. In every way that matters, you're more his mother than she is. The words hit Rosa like a physical blow, not because they were cruel but because they awakened a longing she tried to bury with Miguel. The desire to nurture, to protect, to pour all her love into helping a child grow into the person they were meant to be. I don't know how to be a rich boy's mother, she said uncertainly. And I don't know how to be the kind of father who raises a son with character instead of just privilege, William admitted. Maybe we could figure it out together. Before Rosa could respond, Thomas appeared in the cafeteria doorway, looking remarkably better despite his hospital gown and the four-pole he was wheeling beside him. A nurse hurried after him, clearly flustered. I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling, the nurse said. He insisted on finding you. He wouldn't stay in bed. Dad! Thomas called out, his voice stronger than it had been in days. And Rosa. His face lit up when he saw her. I was looking everywhere for you. Mijo, you should be resting, Rosa said, immediately switching into protective mode as she stood to meet him. I feel better, Thomas insisted. And I was hungry. Real hungry for the first time in forever. He looked between his father and Rosa with the perceptive intelligence of a child who'd grown up watching adult interactions. Were you guys talking about me? William and Rosa exchanged glances, both unsure how to explain the conversation they'd been having. We were talking about how brave Rosa is, William said finally, and how lucky we are that she was paying attention when it mattered. Thomas studied Rosa with serious 12-year-old eyes. Dad told me you saved my life. He said someone was trying to hurt me, and you figured it out. Rosa knelt down to Thomas's eye level, her maternal instincts taking over completely. Sometimes bad people do bad things, Mijo. But you are safe now. Your papa and I, we make sure nobody hurts you again. Are you going to stay? Thomas asked, the question carrying more weight than his young voice should have had to bear. People always leave. Mom left. The nannies always quit. Teachers change every year. Are you going to leave too? Rosa felt her heart crack open. This child, this wealthy, privileged child who had everything money could buy, was asking for the one thing she'd lost and the one thing she had the most to give, the promise of someone who would stay. She looked at William, who nodded almost imperceptibly. I'm not going anywhere, Mijo, she said, her voice thick with emotion. If you want me to stay, I will stay. Thomas threw his arms around her, and Rosa felt something she'd thought was dead forever spring back to life in her chest. The fierce, protective love of a mother for her child. Different from what she'd felt for Miguel, but just as real and just as powerful. Over Thomas's head, her eyes met William's, and she saw her own transformation reflected in his face. They were both different people than they'd been 12 hours ago. Broken in some ways, healed in others, but most importantly, no longer alone. Question for reflection. Have you ever had someone show up in your life exactly when you needed them most? Tell us about a time when an unexpected connection changed everything. Are you crying? Thomas asked, pulling back to look at Rosa's face. Happy tears, Mijo, she said, wiping her eyes. These are happy tears. Thomas had been discharged from the hospital that morning with strict instructions for continued care and monitoring. William had insisted on bringing both Rosa and Thomas to his penthouse mansion, a sprawling testament to wealth that overlooked Central Park from its commanding position on Fifth Avenue. Rosa stood in the marble foyer, feeling overwhelmed by the opulence surrounding her. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow patterns on walls adorned with original paintings worth more than she would earn in several lifetimes. The silence was different here, not the comfortable quiet of a home, but the hollow echo of a space too large for the people living in it. "This is where you live?" she asked Thomas, who was giving her an impromptu tour while his father dealt with the security team that had been stationed around the property. "Yeah, but it's too big," Thomas said matter-of-factly. "Sometimes I get lost trying to find Dad. And it's really quiet. Not like your house probably is." Rosa thought of her tiny apartment in Queens, where the neighbor's television bled through thin walls and the subway rumbled beneath the floor every few minutes. "My place is very small," she said, "but it has good light in the morning, and I can hear Mrs. Chen's grandchildren playing in the courtyard." "That sounds nice," Thomas said wistfully. "It sounds like people actually live there." They were interrupted by William's voice echoing from his study, raised in anger as he spoke on the phone. "I don't care what the board thinks about the stock price. Someone tried to murder my son, and I want answers. No, postponing the merger is not an option. Because some things are more important than profit margins, Richard." Rosa noticed Thomas flinching at his father's tone, and she instinctively put a protective arm around the boy's shoulders. "He's not angry at you," she said softly. "He's scared and worried, and sometimes when men are scared, they sound angry instead." "I know," Thomas said, but his voice was small. "He's been on the phone all morning. Ever since we got home, it's like he forgot I was here." Rosa felt a familiar stab of concern. She'd watched William transform over the past day, seen him become vulnerable, caring, present in a way that was clearly new for him. But now, back in his element of power and control, he was slipping into old patterns. The front door chimed with the arrival of visitors. Rosa heard voices in the foyer, expensive voices discussing legal strategies and damage control. Within minutes, the mansion was filled with lawyers, private investigators, PR specialists, and board members who'd converged to deal with this situation. "Thomas," William called from his study, his voice carrying the distracted tone of a man juggling multiple crises. "Come say hello to the team." Thomas looked up at Rosa uncertainly. "Do I have to?" Before Rosa could answer, William appeared in the doorway, flanked by 3 men in identical expensive suits. His transformation back into CEO mode was complete. The vulnerable father from the hospital had been replaced by the commanding businessman who ruled boardrooms. "Thomas, I want you to meet our legal team," William said, his voice carrying automatic authority. "And Rosa, you'll need to give a detailed statement about everything you observed at the hospital." One of the lawyers, a silver-haired man with predatory eyes, looked Rosa up and down dismissively. "Mr. Sterling, while we appreciate Mrs. Martinez's intervention, we need to be careful about her continued involvement. Her immigration status, her employment history, her lack of formal education, all of it could be used to discredit her testimony if this goes to trial." Rosa felt the familiar sting of being judged and found wanting by people who'd never had to fight for anything in their lives. But worse than their dismissal was watching William nod along with their assessment, his face betraying no recognition of the woman who'd saved his son's life. "We're recommending minimal media exposure for Mrs. Martinez," another lawyer continued. "Perhaps a modest financial settlement and a confidentiality agreement to ensure." You want to pay me to shut up? Rosa interrupted, her voice sharp with anger. The lawyers exchanged glances, clearly unused to being challenged by someone they considered beneath their notice. Mrs. Martinez, the first lawyer said condescendingly, we're trying to protect you. The media attention from this case could be overwhelming for someone in your circumstances. My circumstances, Rosa repeated flatly. You mean because I'm poor? Because I clean toilets? Because I have an accent? William shifted uncomfortably but didn't intervene. Rosa watched him, waiting for him to defend her the way he had at the hospital, but he remained silent, trapped between the world he'd always inhabited and the person he'd briefly become. We're not suggesting anything inappropriate, the third lawyer said smoothly. But the defense will certainly attack your credibility. Your son's death, your grief, your lack of medical training. They'll paint you as an unreliable witness driven by emotional projection. The mention of Miguel hit Rosa like a physical blow. She looked at William, who was staring at the floor, unable to meet her eyes. Thomas, William said abruptly, why don't you go to your room while we finish this meeting? I want to stay with Rosa, Thomas said, moving closer to her side. Thomas, go to your room, William repeated, his tone brooking no argument. Rosa watched the boy's face crumble with disappointment and confusion. This morning, his father had seemed like a different person. Present, caring, protective. Now Thomas was being dismissed like an inconvenience while adults made decisions about his life. Go on, Mijo, Rosa said gently, squeezing Thomas's shoulder. I'll come find you soon. After Thomas reluctantly left, the lawyers resumed their strategy session as if Rosa weren't in the room. They discussed media management, legal precedents, and damage control for Sterling Biotech's reputation. Rosa realized with growing clarity that to them, she wasn't a hero who'd saved a child's life. She was a liability to be managed. The key is controlling the narrative, one lawyer was saying. We position Mr. Sterling as the vigilant father who uncovered the plot, with Mrs. Martinez as a supporting witness. That way, if her credibility comes under attack, it doesn't damage the core case. Excuse me, Rosa said, her voice cutting through their discussion like a knife. I'm standing right here. The lawyers looked at her with barely concealed irritation, but William still wouldn't meet her eyes. Mrs. Martinez, the silver-haired lawyer said with false patience, we understand this is emotional for you, but we need to approach this strategically. Your role in this case needs to be carefully managed to ensure the best outcome for everyone. The best outcome for who? Rosa demanded. For Thomas? For justice? Or for Sterling Biotech's stock price? Now William did look at her, and Rosa saw something in his eyes that made her stomach drop. Calculation. The businessman was weighing costs and benefits, and she could see herself being measured against the potential damage to his empire. Rosa, he said carefully, they have a point about the media attention. Maybe it would be better if you... If I what? Rosa interrupted. If I take money and disappear. If I let you rewrite what happened so it sounds better for your image. That's not what I'm saying, William said, but his voice lacked conviction. That's exactly what you're saying, Rosa shot back. Last night, you told me we're in this together. You say Thomas needs someone who will fight for him. But now your lawyers tell you I'm embarrassed, and suddenly you think maybe I should step back. The room fell silent except for the ticking of an antique clock that probably cost more than Rosa's annual salary. You're putting words in my mouth, William said defensively. I don't need to put words in your mouth, Rosa replied, her voice breaking with disappointment. Your silence says everything. She looked around at the lawyers, at the opulent room, at William's carefully neutral expression. I was a fool to think a rich man could really be different. I was foolish to think you saw me as a person instead of a problem to be solved. Rosa, that's not fair, William began. Fair? Rosa laughed bitterly. Fair is what Miguel never got. Fair is justice that doesn't depend on how much money you have. Fair is not being told to shut up and take money because my truth is inconvenient. She headed for the door, but William's voice stopped her. Where are you going? Rosa turned back, and William was struck by the devastating disappointment in her eyes. I'm going back to being invisible, she said quietly. Just like you need me to be. Rosa, wait. But she was already gone, leaving William standing in his marble foyer surrounded by expensive lawyers and the hollow echo of his own choices. Through the window, he could see her walking away down Fifth Avenue, her small figure disappearing into the city that had taught her to be invisible in the first place. Upstairs, Thomas pressed his face against his bedroom window, watching the only person who'd made him feel truly cared for walk out of his life. Just like everyone else always did. The mansion fell silent again, but now the quiet felt different to William. Not peaceful but empty. And for the first time in his adult life, he wondered if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life by choosing his empire over his heart. Rosa's apartment was everything Thomas had imagined it would be. Small but warm, filled with the scent of sofrito and the sound of life happening all around it. She sat at her tiny kitchen table, still wearing her hospital uniform, staring at Miguel's photograph on the windowsill. Her son smiled back at her from behind the glass, frozen forever at age 9, clutching the soccer ball she'd saved 3 months to buy him. The apartment felt different now, though. After spending a night in the sterile luxury of Mount Sinai and a morning in William's mansion, her own space seemed both more precious and more humble than before. This was where she belonged, among people who struggled and survived, who knew what it meant to be overlooked and undervalued. Her phone had been buzzing for hours with calls from William, but she'd ignored them all. What was there to say? He'd made his choice the moment he let his lawyers discuss her like a problem to be managed rather than a person to be respected. A soft knock at her door interrupted her brooding. Through the peephole she saw Mrs. Chen from across the hall, holding a covered plate. Rosa Mija, the elderly Chinese woman said when Rosa opened the door. You look terrible. Come, I made too much lo mein. Rosa managed a weak smile. Mrs. Chen was 83 years old and barely spoke English, but somehow they developed a friendship built on shared understanding of what it meant to be immigrant women in a city that didn't always welcome them. Gracias, Senora Chen, but I'm not very hungry. You eat, Mrs. Chen insisted, pushing past Rosa into the apartment with the authority of someone who'd raised 6 children. You're too skinny already. What happened? You look like somebody died. Rosa accepted the plate and sat back down at her table, Mrs. Chen settling across from her with the patience of someone who understood that some stories needed time to unfold. I thought maybe things could be different, Rosa said finally. I thought maybe I found people who see me as a person, not just as a cleaning lady. Mrs. Chen nodded sagely. Rich people are always the same. They are nice to you when they need something, but when their friends come around. It's not just that, Rosa said, tears threatening again. It's the boy, Thomas. He's a good kid, and he needs someone to really care about him. But his father. She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. His father what? His father is scared of what his important friends think about being grateful to someone like me. Mrs. Chen made a dismissive sound. Some men are more worried about looking strong than being strong. Before Rosa could respond, her phone rang again. This time it wasn't William's number. It was one she didn't recognize. Senora Rosa. The voice was small and familiar. Thomas. Rosa's heart clenched. Me, Joe, how did you get this number? I asked the security guy to find it, Thomas said. Are you okay? You left so fast and Dad's been acting weird all day. Rosa closed her eyes, fighting back tears. I'm okay, baby. How are you feeling? Better. The doctors said the medicine is almost all out of my body now. Thomas paused. Rosa, are you coming back? Dad won't tell me anything, but I heard him arguing with the lawyers about you. I don't think so, Mijo, Rosa said gently. Your father has his world, and I have mine. Sometimes they don't fit together. But that's stupid, Thomas said with the blunt honesty of childhood. You saved my life. You made Dad smile for the first time in forever. You made everything better, and now you're just going to leave. Rosa looked at Miguel's photograph, remembering her son's fierce loyalty to the people he loved, his inability to understand why adults made things so complicated. Sometimes leaving is the only choice, Thomas. No, it's not, Thomas said firmly. My mom left because she said Dad cared more about his company than his family. The nannies left because Dad was never around to make them feel important. Everyone leaves because they think Dad doesn't care enough to fight for them. His voice grew stronger. But he does care about you. I can tell. He's just scared. Scared of what? Scared of being different than he's always been. Scared of what people will think if he admits that the cleaning lady is smarter and braver than all his fancy friends. Thomas paused, but mostly scared that if he lets himself care about people, they'll leave him anyway. Rosa felt something crack open in her chest. This 12-year-old boy understood his father better than William understood himself. You are very wise for someone so young, she said softly. I learned from watching, Thomas said. Rosa, please don't give up on us. I know Dad messed up today, but he's trying to be better. He just doesn't know how. After they hung up, Rosa sat in the growing darkness of her apartment, Mrs. Chen having quietly slipped away to give her privacy. Through her thin walls, she could hear the Gonzalez family arguing in the apartment above, the Martinez children playing soccer in the hallway. Mrs. Park's television turned up too loud because she was going deaf. This was her world, messy, loud, real. But for one brief moment, she'd glimpsed another world where her voice mattered, where her instincts were valued, where she could be more than invisible. 23 miles away, in his sterile mansion, William Sterling sat in his study staring at his phone. He'd dismissed the lawyers hours ago, but their words echoed in his mind. Manage the situation, control the narrative, minimize liability. All the strategies that had made him successful in business, but felt hollow and wrong when applied to Rosa. Thomas appeared in his doorway, no longer the weak, pale child from the hospital, but a boy with color in his cheeks and determination in his eyes. Dad, we need to talk. William looked up, surprised by the authority in his son's voice. Thomas, it's late. You should be resting. I called Rosa, Thomas said, walking into the study uninvited. She thinks you don't want her around anymore. William set down his phone. It's complicated, son. The lawyers think. I don't care what the lawyers think, Thomas interrupted. I care what you think. Do you want Rosa around or not? The directness of the question caught William off guard. Of course I do. She saved your life. Then why did you let them talk about her like she was a problem instead of a hero? William was quiet for a long moment, recognizing his own failings reflected in his son's disappointment. "Because I was scared," he finally admitted. "Scared of what?" William looked at his son, really looked at him, and saw not a child who needed protection from difficult truths, but a young man who deserved honesty. "Scared that if I chose her over what everyone expects of me, I'd lose everything I've built. My company, my reputation, my place in the world." Thomas studied his father with the clear-eyed perception of youth. "But what good is having everything if you're too scared to fight for the people who matter?" The question hung in the air between them, and William realized that his 12-year-old son had just articulated the choice he'd been avoiding all day. "You're right," William said quietly. "I was a coward today." "So fix it," Thomas said simply. "Rosa doesn't care about your money or your company. She cares about us. That's worth more than all the lawyers and board meetings in the world." William looked around his study, at the awards on the walls, the expensive art, the symbols of everything he'd achieved. None of it had sat beside his son's hospital bed. None of it had risked everything to save a child's life. None of it had shown him what real courage looked like. He picked up his phone and scrolled to Rosa's number, his thumb hovering over the call button. Everything his lawyers had said was true. Bringing Rosa fully into his world would be complicated, potentially damaging to his carefully constructed image. But Thomas was also right. Some things were worth more than protecting an image. The choice was simple, really. He could continue being the man he'd always been, successful, wealthy, and ultimately alone. Or he could choose to become the man Rosa and Thomas believed he could be. William pressed the call. The press conference had been William's idea, but as he stood at the podium facing a sea of reporters and cameras, he felt Rosa's presence beside him like an anchor. She wore a simple blue dress, one he'd had his assistant purchase because she'd insisted her hospital uniform wasn't appropriate for television, and her hair was styled in a way that made her look both professional and unmistakably herself. Thomas sat in the front row, flanked by the security team that had become a permanent part of their lives. The boy looked healthy and strong, the color back in his cheeks and the spark returned to his eyes. But more than that, he looked happy in a way William had never seen before. "Ladies and gentlemen," William began, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "3 weeks ago, my son Thomas was the victim of an attempted murder at Mount Sinai Hospital. Today, I want to tell you about the woman who saved his life, and in doing so saved mine as well." He gestured to Rosa, who stood quietly beside him, her presence dignified despite the overwhelming attention focused on her. Rosa Martinez was working the night shift as a custodial staff member when she noticed something wrong with my son's 4-bag. Despite having every reason to remain silent, despite knowing she risked her job, her safety, and her reputation, she spoke up. Her courage, her instincts, and her refusal to be invisible saved my son's life. The reporters scribbled notes and camera flashes lit up the room, but William kept his focus on Rosa, drawing strength from her calm presence. "The investigation has revealed that Dr. Harrison was being blackmailed by competitors of my pharmaceutical company. They wanted to damage Sterling Biotech's reputation by making it appear that our CEO couldn't even protect his own son. Dr. Harrison was coerced into administering a slow-acting plant toxin that would have killed Thomas while making it look like a medical mystery." A reporter in the front row raised her hand. "Mr. Sterling, how do you respond to critics who say you're only highlighting Mrs. Martinez's role to improve your company's image after the scandal?" William smiled, and for the first time in his adult life, the expression was completely genuine. "I'd say those critics don't understand what real value looks like," he said. "For most of my life, I measured worth by stock prices and profit margins. Rosa Martinez has taught me that true value comes from courage, compassion, and the willingness to speak truth to power, even when power doesn't want to listen." He turned to Rosa, who had been listening with the quiet dignity that had first impressed him in the hospital. "Mrs. Martinez," he continued, "has agreed to join Sterling Biotech as our new Director of Patient Advocacy, a position we're creating specifically to ensure that voices like hers are never ignored again in medical settings." Rosa stepped forward to the microphone, her hand shaking slightly but her voice steady. 15 years ago, I came to this country with nothing but hope for a better life for my son," she said, her accent adding weight to her words rather than diminishing them. "I learn English by watching television. I learn about America by cleaning offices and hospitals and homes of people who never see me." The room was completely silent now, every reporter hanging on her words. 3 years ago, my son Miguel died because nobody listened to his mother's concerns about his treatment. I promised him that night that I would never stay silent again when a child's life is in danger." Her voice grew stronger. "When I see Thomas Sterling in that hospital bed, I see all the children whose mothers don't have a voice, whose families don't have power. I speak up not just for Thomas, but for Miguel, and for every parent who has been told they don't understand, they don't matter, they are not qualified to protect their own children." She looked directly into the cameras, and through them, to every parent watching who had ever felt powerless in the face of authority. You don't need a medical degree to know when something is wrong with your child. You don't need money to have good instincts. You don't need perfect English to speak truth. What you need is courage to use your voice, even when people tell you that your voice doesn't matter. The applause was immediate and sustained. William watched Rosa accept the recognition she deserved for years, and felt something shift permanently in his chest. After the press conference, they walked together through Central Park, an unlikely family that had formed in crisis and been strengthened by choice. Thomas ran ahead, chasing pigeons with the boundless energy of a healthy 12-year-old, while William and Rosa followed at a more measured pace. "Are you sure about this job offer?" Rosa asked, still processing the morning's events. "Your board members, do they really agree to have a cleaning lady as director?" William laughed. "Former cleaning lady. And after they saw how the stock price jumped when news of your heroism broke, they were very supportive of the appointment." His expression grew serious. "But more than that, they've seen what happens when companies ignore valuable perspectives because they come from unexpected sources." And Thomas, how he feel about sharing his father with a patient advocacy program? "Are you kidding?" William said, watching his son attempt to feed a reluctant squirrel. "This is the first time in his life he's proud of what I do for a living. Yesterday he told his friends that his dad finally found a job that actually helps people." They reached a bench overlooking the reservoir, and sat down to watch Thomas's ongoing negotiation with the local wildlife. "I have something for you," William said, pulling a small wrapped package from his jacket. Rosa opened it carefully, then gasped. Inside was a simple silver bracelet with a small charm, a rose. "Pink roses," William said quietly. "Like the ones Miguel was going to buy you for Mother's Day." Rosa's eyes filled with tears, but they were the healing kind that washed away old pain rather than creating new wounds. "There's an inscription," William added. Rosa turned the charm over and read the words engraved in elegant script, "Para la madre que nunca se rindió," for the mother who never gave up. "It's beautiful," she whispered, then looked up at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "But I am not your son's mother." "No," William agreed, "but you're the closest thing he's ever had to a mother who chooses to stay. And if you're willing." He paused, gathering courage for words that would have been unthinkable 3 weeks ago. If you're willing, I'd like you to be more than his patient advocate. I'd like you to be part of our family. Really part of it. Rosa studied his face, looking for the uncertainty or calculation that had hurt her so deeply before. Instead, she saw something she'd never expected to find in the eyes of one of New York's most powerful men. Vulnerability, hope, and the kind of love that was willing to risk everything. Are you sure you are ready for a Puerto Rican woman to mess up your perfect rich man life? She asked with a smile that held both mischief and affection. My life was never perfect, William said. It was just expensive. But with you and Thomas, maybe it could be something better. Maybe it could be real. Thomas came running back to them, breathless and grinning. The squirrels here are really picky about their food, he announced. But I think I'm making progress. He looked between the two adults, noting their joined hands and Rosa's tears. Are you guys okay? We're more than okay, William said, pulling his son close. We're a family. Rosa looked at Thomas, this boy who had lost one mother to indifference and found another in the most unlikely place, and felt her heart expand to make room for a love she'd thought was buried forever. See, she said, fastening the bracelet around her wrist where it caught the morning light. We are family. As they walked home together through the city that had taught them all different lessons about power and worth, none of them looked back. The past had shaped them, but it would not define them. They had each other now, and that was enough to build something beautiful. 6 months later, Sterling Biotech would launch the Miguel Martinez Foundation, providing free medications to low-income families and establishing patient advocacy programs in hospitals across the country. Rosa would become one of the most respected voices in healthcare reform, testifying before Congress about the importance of listening to parents regardless of their education or social status. But that morning in Central Park, they weren't thinking about the future they would build or the changes they would make. They were simply walking home together, a father who had learned that true strength came from vulnerability, a son who had discovered what it meant to be genuinely cared for, and a woman who had finally found a place where her voice was not just heard, but celebrated. Final reflection question. Sometimes the most powerful transformations happen when we choose love over fear, inclusion over exclusion. What's one way you can use your voice or position to lift up someone who usually goes unheard? Share your thoughts below and let's create a community where everyone's voice matters. In the end, justice had been served. Dr. Harrison was sentenced to 15 years for attempted murder, and the pharmaceutical executives who had orchestrated the plot faced federal charges. But more than justice, they had found something rarer and more valuable. A love that transcended every boundary society had tried to build between them. And in a small apartment in Queens, Miguel's photograph smiled down at a new kind of family photo. One that included his mother surrounded by people who saw her not as invisible help, but as the hero she had always been. Thanks for sticking with this story till the very end. But trust me, you haven't seen anything yet. The next story is crazier, more shocking, and will blow your mind. Click the image on your screen now and dive right in. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss a single twist.